Wow, what a crowd. This is what you want to do on a Saturday? Really? No, I'm just kidding. Of course this is what you want to do. I'm Wanda Nanibush. I'm Anishinaabe from Beausoleil First Nation. It's just 2 hours north of here, a little island in Georgian Bay. I'm Wolf Clan, and I come from this land right here. I sat there last night thinking about what I was going to say, and I was running through the words for land and homeland. We don't have a word for homeland, actually. I looked, I searched. We'd have to make a word up to have the word for homeland. We have all this thinking around home, all this thinking around land, but the joining of the two is something that's being problematized in this conference, but it was interesting that I couldn't find the word. So it got me thinking about what I mean when I think about the word land. Let's just stick with that first, because it breaks apart, and its connection to home. And I was trying to remember back to my earliest memories of land, and I used to go for these walks with my grandfather in the bush, and he would be like pointing out different like medicines or different plants, what they do, this kind of thing, always talking in the language, in our language. And I would be talking away to him, my little hand, just real cute. And he was showing me also the way of being with the land and also with each other. So I started thinking about what is the relationship between something land. It's hard to see it as something separate from myself, or something separate from the way I think about community, the way I think about love, the way I think about caring. All of these things are part of it. I know the land only through 3 ways: the way that people tell me stories about it, the way I tell stories about it, and my deep and profound bodily relationship to it, my emotional relationship, my spiritual relationship. Because Anishinaabe people are not Cartesians, we're not like, here's the mind, let it colonize the body. We don't have this problem. I don't know how many people I've dated that aren't Anishinaabe, and this is our first problem. It's like the number one thing we have to get over. It's like, I don't believe in rational conversations at the kitchen table. I'm going to have these feelings. They're important. And the way my body feels them is important. I am very angry with you. It's like, what the hell is that? That's colonialism in our bodies and minds and our mouths and our relationships. Anyway, you're probably thinking, don't date her. So I was thinking about that, and that the first beautiful feeling of land was with my grandfather. And then we live on an island, so I can't separate land from water. For me, they're intricate. So we call her Mama Aki, which is like Mother Earth, if you want to talk about it that way. Unfortunately, those words have been ruined by all of this hippie bullshit. So I always bristle a little when I have to say that, but I'm learning not to, because the concept is really deep and profound and important for us to keep talking about. So she is our teacher, and that's what my grandfather was teaching me, through how teaching is a relationship of love. And so my relationship to my mother is one of love. And if it's one of love, how I respond to her, how I take care of her, all those kinds of relationship that I have with that land has to be seen through that lens. I had an argument. I don't know why I'm talking about relationships so much today. It's probably because I was arguing yesterday with my partner all day. So we fixed it this morning from 6:30 a.m. to now. And we both live in occupied territories. We both live in land that's occupied by somebody else that didn't get it in a good way. and doesn't understand the notion of sharing. So we understand deeply how much our relationship to our land impacts our relationship, and the way in which all of these kinds of pressures and tensions and pains and pulling apart of my deep and profound love for my land, how that impacts everything. Everything I do, everything I am, everything that I love. So my first experience of that part was when the police showed up at our door one morning. I was 5, and I hid under the bed, and they came in to take all of us kids out of the house. So me, my 2 brothers, my nieces and nephews, there were 7 of us. They took us to a police station, and we were playing I remember playing under the table, and then they take us to a foster home. So land here is always, it's always about land. Because we don't take people's kids away, in my opinion, for any other reason than land. You can tell yourself whatever you want. It's always been about the land. Residential schools was the beginning of that. If you can imagine an entire community just devoid of children, and the things that children bring into a community, into a family, that's about breaking land, our relationship with the land. It's because community, culture, language, all these things arise from our relationship with that land. And we have all this critical theory that came after to say, that's bullshit, that's just a stereotype. Native people, stop talking about them as if they're connected to the land. I'm like, no, keep talking about us as if we are connected to the land. There's a brilliant man, Art Manuel, who wrote a book called Unsettling Canada. If you haven't read it, please read it. He's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant strategist. He said that we own 2% of the land in Canada. If you can imagine, Indigenous people, we have 2% of the land in Canada. That's actually even less than that, because my land that I have this certificate of possession on my reserve. That comes from the Canadian government, because the Canadian government is the one who holds my land in trust. So I don't actually have any land in this country. We are completely landless in the refugee sense of the term. And I don't think people understand that. And when you are a refugee in your own land, it's all the emotional breaks that happen with that are there. I remember the first moment I went back to my reserve when I was 10, actually it was 10, and I moved back permanently when I was 12. The moment that I stepped my bare feet on that land, I just wept. And you can feel that something inside of you was missing, something inside of you was broken. And you can get all that energy back up and feel it all the way through your body and into your soul again. And this is an experience so many people have, that it has to be contended with. If so many people have that experience, we have to address it. I think some of the best reconciliation projects that have happened, there are 2 things that I think are happening that I think is really exciting. One is Indigenous people are moving back out into their traditional territories. So they're no longer sitting in the cage of their reserve. They're going out and they're building cabins on their traditional territories with or without permission. They're taking their children out again to hunt, to fish, to learn about medicines, to do all those kinds of things. I still have 47 seconds. I'm going to blow your freaking mind. And I think the other part is there's all these people who are giving land back or giving buildings. And I think that we have 98% of the poverty. So if we have 2% of the land, we have all this poverty that has built Canada. So Canada's wealth is built on that. And until people understand that, they won't be able to understand what it is that needs to be fixed. It's not about holding hands necessarily. It's actually one hand going here It's yours. Sorry about that, man. I'm just being flip about it. But I think this idea of the land as our teacher also means that we are not in a space of dispossession, fundamentally, because the land is still here. It's still our teacher. Our culture has not disappeared. We still have all of that in us, all that strength, all that beauty, and we can rebuild, and we are rebuilding everything that we want for the future. A great man once said, the greatest tragedy that can befall us is to go unimagined. And our people are doing that great imagining every day. Thank you. Ha!
I get to ask you a question.
Oh, man.
So thanks for that. And
It's a stage. How can you
I know,
not?
you got to use it. You got to use it. So I was thinking, you're curator of art.
Yes.
And I was thinking about what you said about land, because clearly an embodied read on that has profound implications for art, which I think, particularly in a kind of Western art narrative, has often been extraordinarily detached from an embodied practice, in fact, very Cartesian in a sense.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I don't want to open up some giant can of worms, but certainly...
Just a little one.
It's a little can of worms.
A little can of worms.
Just a tiny can. But how does this, how do you as a curator kind of read your sensibility into a kind of legibility of what's happening in contemporary art practice today, particularly political practice?
Right.
You know, because we are this sort of socially engaged art gathering.
Are we socially engaged art? No, I'm just kidding. I think that there are a number of ways. I mean, we have to contend with an art market that does do this thing to art that is like horrifying to me, which is it picks its stars, and those stars travel the world from thing to thing to thing to thing, and then that kind of builds like the way that institutions tend to operate and how they want to function. It builds people's careers, builds curators' careers, blah, 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 blah. So I feel like if you're contending with the land in this kind of embodied way, then there's a way of ripping that power out from underneath. So instead of paying attention to it or complaining about it or whatever, just go like this and start building something over here. And I think artists already do that naturally. Artists who are not interested in that sort of world, they are doing their work, and they just continue to do their work. And their work has profound influence. Whether anybody notices or not in the powers that be, who gives a fuck, you know? In the end, I think that to be an embodied curator is to contend with the body of the audience too, to contend with the body of the artist, to think about their desires, their spirit, and the spirit of the audience in a way that can kind of build something stronger next time. Create a space of vulnerability so people can be open. Create a space where people are comfortable with what they don't know. To create a space where, I don't care what people know, actually. I care very little what people know. I care very much about how their comportment, the way they approach life, the way they approach a question, the way they approach their work, the way they approach loving, their parenting, all that kind of stuff. So I think art obviously performs that in a different way.
Thanks, Wanda. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.